Please be advised this meeting is being broadcast over the internet. Agenda 2 is consideration of approval of the minutes from the June 29, 2016 committee meeting.
So moved.
I have a motion from Mr. Steen. Need a second? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, do we have a quorum? Let's see.
Shelley's here.
Oh, well. Okay. Let's see.
No, you're not.
I need Fred. That's all right. We need one more person.
Fred is here.
Yep. Where?
You have Arcelia, John, and you.
Oh, okay. All right, so we're going to approve the minutes. I have a motion.
Second.
I have a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is consideration of the approval consent calendar. As you can see, we have quite a few on there. J, L, M, N, R, S, T, and U. Any questions or discussion? We have a motion from Arcelia.
Second.
Mr. Steen has a second. Any questions? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Agenda item 4 is public testimony on the agenda items, and we do not have anyone registered at this time. Agenda item 5A is the report to the committee on activities of the Graduate Education Advisory Committee. Dr. Sunny Singh, chair of the GEAC, will provide an update on the Graduate Education Advisory Committee. This is informational only. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you all. Again, my name is Mervan Singh. I'm Dean of the Graduate School of Biomedical Sciences at the University of North Texas Health Science Center. And for the last few months, I've had the privilege of serving as the chair of the Graduate Education Advisory Council. And I'm here to give you a brief overview of their activities this past fiscal year. It started out with, there were 3 opportunities for the GEAC to convene. One was on September 14th of 2015. Then there was a general information session on the RAND Corporation Study Group on December the 18th. And then the, April 1 was the last meeting in the last fiscal year, recognizing that we have one coming up this coming Friday. There were essentially 4 meaty items that were discussed by the GEAC. The first was the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board's 60 by 30 TEX strategic plan. We had a chance to discuss, provide some feedback to the staff of the coordinating board. Second was information originally presented by Commissioner Paredes regarding the competency-based education for graduate programs that are being considered and implemented. Some discussion about definitions around competency-based, because not everyone in the graduate arena interprets the word competency-based in the same way, but I think as discussions have followed, there's some congruence and certainly at the very minimum some dovetailing of those respective definitions. The third item, which is still an ongoing discussion, is the characteristics of professional doctoral programs. As all of you know, in 2008, I believe, the 18 characteristics of doctoral programs, referencing mainly the, if I may, the traditional doctoral programs, non-professional doctoral programs, was adopted, modified, I believe, in 2010. And it has been available for public consumption. Now, before the coordinating board and before the GEAC is consideration of inclusion of characteristics of professional doctoral programs. And that discussion continues, and that'll be part of the agenda on this coming Friday's meeting. And the final and not any less meaty of a discussion was the RAND Corporation's study on graduate education. As this group well knows, the RAND Corporation, Mr. Charles Goldman and colleagues presented an overview of their activities, and we, the members of the GEAC, have just received the initial report of the RAND Corporation's findings, and we'll be discussing that as well this coming Friday. That represents our principal activities. I'm glad to entertain questions, or we can leave it at that.
Members? Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And please tell your committee how much we appreciate their hard work.
Thank you. I certainly will. Thanks.
Agenda item 5B is a report to the Committee on Activities of the Certification Advisory Council. Dr. Carolyn Wilson Green serves as the chair, but she's not able to be with us today, so Dr. Rex Peebles will provide an update.
Thank you. The Certification Advisory Council serves as other advisory councils do, to provide advice and input to the board regarding private post-secondary educational institutions in Texas. And they have three major tasks. One is to review site visit reports and an applicant's response for each certificate of authority application. We have not had many of these in recent years, but we currently have two underway. They also make recommendations regarding the certificate of authority application to the board, and they review requests by an accrediting agency for recommendation by the board, and also make recommendations to the board regarding the recognition of an accrediting body as well. And then they provide perform other duties that are related to certification. For example, you have in your packet today a set of rules that have been revised around the certificates of authority for institutions and authorization, and also oversight of accrediting bodies. For example, the CAC would also vet those for us as well and provide some feedback on those. Your blue page does indicate that we had a certificate of authority application by Joshua Educational Systems that was reviewed by the Certification Advisory Council, but they have voluntarily withdrawn their proposal at this time.
Any questions? This is informational only. Thank you, Dr. Peebles. Agenda item 5C is an update on the Texas A&M University Kingsville and Texas A&M University Corpus Christi doctoral program in educational leadership relating to competency-based education. I'll ask you to come forward at this time. Randall Bowden with Texas A&M Corpus Christi, Marie Ann Mundy with Kingsville, and Irma Harper with the university system to provide an update. This is informational only. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for asking us to be here. The A&M system has facilitated the process with Texas A&M University Kingsville and Texas A&M University Corpus Christi and implementing the incorporation of the competency-based education program due to a charge that was given to us last September. The system has facilitated the process, but the first step was making sure we understood what competency-based education is all about. We called in CAWS, which is the Council of Adult Experiential Learning, to come in and help us, and also the Education Advisory Board based in Washington to help us with this process. We had two meetings that was truly intended just for the A&M Corpus Christi campus in Kingsville, but our entire A&M system, all 11 universities, were very, eager to find out more about competency-based education. So we had two large meetings in the spring to help us with this, to make sure we understood what we were doing and how we wanted to go through the process. Through this process, we determined that with our programs have already been developed as they were and it has been approved by the board, that we would go through one component of competency-based education, which is prior learning assessment, which is PLA. And I have with me today Dr. Bowden, and and Dr. Mundy that will talk to you about the two different approaches that we're using. And there are two different methods that we chose to use to go through this process to incorporate in our doctorate degree. So I'll turn it over to Randall so he can talk to you about that.
Okay, thank you. If we can go to slide 2, please.
Sure about that. Good.
We decided that two approaches to this were necessary because the types of programs that education has. And one of them is because we have a cognate in principalship and superintendency. Those courses are already based in state competency-based exams. So those state competency-based exams then became the framework for assessing prior learning credit. So if somebody comes into the program that has a certificate in principalship or a certificate in superintendency, then they've already met the state competency levels for experience. At that point, we would be able to award them under a directed study 3 hours of credit that would advance them toward their degree in their doctorate. The second model, then, if we move to that one, was a little bit different approach.
Yep, we lost it.
Okay.
There it goes.
This one was a little bit more detailed. What we had to do was build a model from the ground up. So in essence, there were 13 basic steps that we needed to look at, and the two institutions worked together through all of these steps. The first step was identifying a course that might fit the PLA credit process. And we decided on one course out of the cognate in the program that would be Student Affairs. Student Affairs is one of those courses that bridges the enterprise. So somebody coming in from financial aid would be able to take the prior learning process, somebody coming in from a Student Affairs office, somebody from housing. So it really looked at the enterprise at large and said that anybody who had that prior learning experience could have the potential to demonstrate their expertise in that area. So we went through then these 13 steps. I'm not going to bore everybody with those 13 steps. What came out of that then was a PLA program process. And in your handout, what you will find is a handbook to assess that credit. The difficulty that we had in this process was that we had to understand that somebody coming to us had the expertise. It wasn't faculty members delivering the expertise, it was the student then demonstrating that they had the expertise, and we would assess that. So with that in mind, we took the portfolio approach, and we talked with the consultants at CAWS about that approach. There are a number of approaches, testing, those sorts of things. Our approach with testing was we were still determining the expertise, and then somebody would have to meet that criteria. We wanted to reverse that and make sure that students were truly demonstrating that they had the life experience with that expertise, so we went with the portfolio route. With that route, then, the student would put together, according to the certain criteria that are in the portfolio, their experience, whether it's campus-wide, whether it's with financial aid, whether it's student affairs, housing, whatever component of student affairs, they would have that expertise they could bring to the table. We would assess that. If they met the criteria for acceptance, they would be awarded 3 credits toward the degree in the 60-credit program. If they did not, then they would have to take the course. And those are the 2 basic models. We didn't think that any one model would fit appropriately, and we wanted to give the students the widest berth of opportunity to be able to demonstrate their experience.
Yes.
One of the reasons we're very interested in competency-based education here at the Coordinating Board, and particularly at the graduate level, is because, first of all, we want to accelerate time to degree, which would presumably hold down student debt. We're very much aware of the fact that one of the ways in which Texas is very deficient in relation to other states and public higher education is we have very little money for graduate students, financial aid, fellowship money. In a field like education, it seems to me that we ought to be able to develop competency measures very similar to qualifying exams for the doctoral degree. And instead of just awarding students 3 hours for credit in a 60-hour program, I can imagine situations where people that are in the program have a wealth of knowledge where they might be able to, if they can pass competency exams in certain disciplines, they could get credit for 30 hours, 45 hours. Getting credit for a 3-hour course in a 60-hour program doesn't really help students very much. In terms of, once again, when nobody's talking about compromising on the mastery of the subject matter that's embedded in the doctoral program, we're talking about giving students other ways to demonstrate mastery. And to me, the simplest and the most succinct definition of competency-based education is that you advance students on the basis of mastery of knowledge, not on the basis of completing coursework.
Commissioner, I do want to just add to this, given the current environment, SACS really requires the connection to coursework. While you could do the other, but until a later time, they're almost required until conditions change by the accrediting body to do that, which doesn't prevent what you're suggesting happens,
Right.
But there still has to be that connection to coursework.
Currently, it's about 15 credits toward that, right? Our approach was not to limit it. Our approach was to examine this, the feasibility at the very beginning. And the level of scrutiny that it took, we didn't want to take on more than what would be feasible for faculty and administrators at this point. Once the model is laid out, then it's just a matter of piecing other courses and other types of knowledge into that, and then tying it together for the 60 hours, moving toward that.
And let me just add, the amount of, starting this to begin with is incredibly hard because you have to identify all the competencies, you have to determine how to assess them. I actually was involved in a program at NYU at least 30 years ago, and where I was one of the faculty assessors, and so it can be a challenge. And so, but I think once it's in place, the effort's well worth it and is a benefit to the students. But I think we need to acknowledge that first time, and I hope that what you do will be made available to others in the state, and certainly your own system, but other people that would want in a similar program to use competencies. That would be a great service to everyone.
It is one of those when we had to have our information meetings first so that we truly knew what competency-based education was. And one of the things that we discovered is for a program, especially any program that you develop for competency-based education starts with the first thing, which is building the competencies up there. And we had to learn the difference between competencies within a program and student learner outcomes because they're not the same. But when you have a program that's already developed, then you have to look at what competencies are taught and go from that angle. But when you start a new program, it's much easier to do it with competency-based education because you start at the top with those. So in looking at this and with the consultants that we hired to come in and help us, these were some of the ways that we learned to work with this process. The second method that Randall talked to you about with the portfolio assessment and that is truly more of a competency-based because it did start with the competencies and what the students can master during that time. And in your booklet, you'll find the rubrics, you'll find the course syllabi for all of them that are there for the courses we're using, and how that is incorporated in there. So that was one that developed from the competency level. The first model that we used is one that we used for credentialing purposes because the state has already adopted those standards, and those are the standards and competencies that all the ed administration and certification programs use in the state too. So we were able to use those and with the programs too. So we hit from all angles, and the consultants we were using helped us with this. This is a start. it's a beginning. There's a lot more than what we investigated this year was the actual content. What we will be working on in the future is what else is involved with competency education, what's involved with transcripting, what's involved with the registrar, what's involved with the MLS systems and that sort of thing. So there's a lot of things that we still need to look at to get that true competency-based program. And like I said, we focus more on that prior learning experience because that's really what comes into shortening that degree time and lessening the burden of the cost. That's more what we focused in on.
Members, you have any other questions? Thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Can I make this one?
Oh, David.
One quick announcement related to this. I just realized that we ought to point out that on October 5th, we're having another TAP conference about competency-based education for those interested in applying for the next round of the Affordable Baccalaureate grants.
Yeah.
So the University's Center in Dallas, so just want to remind people of that.
Madam Chair. So we had a lady come from A&M Kingsville. She didn't get a chance to say anything. I don't know if she had. Ma'am, did you have anything you wanted to add to all this? I'm sorry for you to come from Kingsville and.
Work together on all of this.
Yeah.
Corpus Christi and Kingsville worked together on this, so everything he said, we were equally involved. But there's one thing, we do transfer in 15 credit hours with our students. You mentioned, is it Dr. Gardner? That 15 credit hours can be brought in, and we do that with our students. So we do shorten their time.
Thank you for coming in today. Appreciate it.
Agenda item 5D1 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas at Austin for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in computational engineering. Dr. Peebles.
So computational science, computational engineering is a multidisciplinary area that combines both computer work but also in applied mathematics together with engineering to focus on the solution of scientific and engineering problems. It's a developing field, so it's very difficult to come by workforce data on this because there are so few programs and it's such a new field of engineering. But there are only 3 institutions in the U.S. that award a bachelor's degree in this particular area at this particular time. And there is a lot of evidence to suggest that this is a growing and a needed field as well. And it has a lot to do oftentimes with data analysis and that kind of thing. And like most engineering programs, one of the contingencies associated with this is to seek ABET accreditation as well. It's a face-to-face program that will consist of 122 semester credit hours of instruction. If you'll notice, the funding for this program is very, very low, and part of this is because the institution will be transitioning its Department of Aerospace Engineering and using its existing faculty to teach this program and to use those existing funds. So the only additional funds will be the cost of accreditation with ABET, which is approximately $4,200. And we do have some folks here that I believe are present. If you have any questions you want to ask them about the particular program.
Members? If there are no questions, I'll entertain a motion.
I just had a quick question. Dr. Peoples, I noticed the other one is UTRGV. How long has that program been in Texas? You said there's 3 programs. This is in the country, and this will be the second in Texas. Is that correct?
Yes, this will be the second in Texas, and I believe that the UTRGV program has only been there for maybe 2 years at most. It's also relatively new.
I make a motion for approval.
We have a motion by Fred, a second by Arcelia. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 5D2 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas at Austin for a Bachelor of Science degree with a major in environmental engineering. Dr. Peebles.
This particular program will address regional, state, and national job needs. There is some information available on workforce demand for environmental engineering, and from what we can gather, then we're producing far less graduates for the number of openings that are out there. This is also a face-to-face program consisting of 124 semester credit hours. And it's also interesting that this one will also be funded by transitioning from the university civil engineering program. So the enrollments will be transferred from civil engineering over to the environmental engineering program, so that, again, the cost associated with this revolves around ABET accreditation, which, again, is approximately $4,200.
It's a bargain. Any questions? Have a motion from Arcelia.
Second.
Second from Fred. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item 5D3 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas at El Paso for a Doctor of Pharmacy degree with a major in pharmacy and create a School of Pharmacy. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. The University of Texas at El Paso has been involved in a cooperative pharmacy program with the University of Texas at Austin for a number of years. And so this would, in effect, split that program and create a standalone program for University of Texas at El Paso. Currently, students do a 2, 2, and 2. They take 2 years of work at El Paso, and they come to Austin for 2 years and go back to El Paso for 2 years. And this would allow students to remain in El Paso for the full 6 years. It's not altogether clear that, at least on a statewide basis, that the demand for pharmacists is not being met. However, there is a regional demand in El Paso, and there's some figures in your blue pages that indicate that the number of pharmacists in El Paso is well below the statewide average of pharmacists. And this program also has a somewhat unique feature to it, in that it's also going to require Spanish language proficiency to address the regional needs of El Paso as well.
Is there any concern about us exporting pharmacists to New Mexico?
You know, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, particularly with Las Cruces being so close by.
It's a big investment for the state to just lose pharmacists to New Mexico.
I had a quick question before. Is that okay, Mr. Steen? Dr. Peoples, I had a question on, were there any comments from anyone, the Pharmaceutical Association or any other entities on this topic?
Not addressed to the coordinating board. Now, there may have been some addressed to the institution itself, and we do have a couple of representatives here from University of Texas at El Paso, if you'd like to.
I believe we have Howard Daudestel, interim provost, and Jose Rivera, dean of the pharmacy school.
Yes, thank you so much. Indeed, El Paso is facing a critical shortage of pharmacists, not only those who are capable of speaking to patients in Spanish, but have some level of cultural competence to be supportive team members in the provision of care, which, as you know, is very important. We do not expect a drain from El Paso into New Mexico, and in fact, pharmacy businesses as well as healthcare providers in the El Paso region have indicated that they are suffering from a shortage, and it's difficult for them to recruit from outside the area, and often they provide bonuses to do that, but that is not the most satisfactory solution to the problem. So the cooperative program has graduated, I believe,
It's about 140 some students so far.
And 74% of them remain in El Paso, if I'm not.
That's correct.
Do you lose any of them when they go to the 2 years in Austin? Do they decide to stay in Austin and then finish?
Not that many. That's a relatively small amount. El Paso is a family-friendly type of town, so many people want to come back because of family relationships. Related to New Mexico, the University of New Mexico has a cooperative program in Las Cruces. So they are actually recruiting some students to go to Albuquerque. So I don't see that as a major issue.
I like the Spanish requirement.
Yeah, that's a great addition to the program, I agree. So what is the population of El Paso now, approximately?
It's about 800,000.
800,000?
And the metropolitan area is continuing to grow.
What is the nearest pharmacy school program, doctorate program?
That is in Amarillo or Amarillo, and that's about 400 miles away.
400 miles.
Yeah.
Commissioner?
I have an obvious question. What is the anticipated relationship between the pharmacy school and Texas Tech Medical School?
Well, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry.
I can comment on that because
We're very positive and have been working collaboratively with Texas Tech, and not just in pharmacy, but in the other health sciences. We've initiated some planning meetings and so forth, so that we do not duplicate programming, and I think we have a very positive relationship with Texas Tech. But we also have some joint appointments as well.
yeah, most of the faculty that were currently with the co-op program have joint appointments with Texas Tech. We're heavily involved with interprofessional education with Texas Tech, not only the medicine, but also nursing. And of course, we do the same with other programs at UTEP.
So you'll probably have cross-listed courses offered in both in the school of pharmacy and the Foster School?
We have not addressed that yet. Now, we have a good relationship with Rick Lang, and we have talked about finding ways to work closer together, especially in research and education.
Okay, and that was the reason for my question to Dr. Peebles earlier, for that particular reason that the commissioner just brought up. There are a lot of players, I would say, in the healthcare arena there in El Paso, and that was my reason for the population, and I'm familiar with the area, and I think that if you're having students that have the unique opportunity to practice in their home environment, I think that's a very positive thing.
Yes, thank you.
Madam Chair, I just had a really quick question. What is the estimated, and Dr. Peoples, you might have presented this in here, but the estimated savings for students to stay in El Paso and finish the whole program there rather than coming to UT Austin for a couple of years?
We don't have a figure on that, but the estimated saving has to do with relocation and the higher cost of living in Austin.
I would imagine it's a good number for the
Yes.
student. Good savings, thank you.
What is your annual tuition in the School of Pharmacy?
It's going to be consistent with UT Austin, which is about $15,000, and it's the second lowest in the state.
Any other questions?
Madam Chair, I move for approval.
Mr. Steen has a
Oh,
question.
sorry, John.
That's all right.
Oh, that's all right. So thank you all for, it's a long trek from El Paso. Thank you for,
Yeah.
for being with us here today. And I think you've made a convincing case for regional need. And like my colleagues, I think the Spanish language proficiency is great. That's a great part of it. So I was going to make the motion if Ms. Acosta, I guess I'll second her motion.
Okay, so we have a motion by Arcelia, a second by John. Any other discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
John, thank you for coming.
Agenda item 5D4 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from the University of Texas Health Science Center at San Antonio for a Doctor of Occupational Therapy degree in occupational therapy. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. So this would create an entry-level doctoral program in occupational therapy. UTSA already has a master's degree in this area. And the Professional Association, the American Occupational Therapy Association, has recommended that the doctorate degree become the point of entry into the profession beginning in the year 2025. So we've already had a couple of institutions that have moved to a doctoral degree in this regard in sense of transitioning from a master's to a doctoral degree. This would be the first program in the state that treats the doctorate as an entry-level degree itself, but it does follow the recommendations made by the Professional Association connected with them. And so they would transition their master's program into a doctoral program, which does reduce some of the costs associated with this, and they'll be able to use some of their existing faculty. They will have to add some. It's a 114 semester credit hour program. Beyond the bachelor's degree, it's designed to be taken in a 3-year time period. It also includes over 1,000 hours of clinical experience, and this is a professional practice degree, so it does not require dissertation, but it does require a sort of experiential project, if you will, at the end of the program.
I have a couple of questions. I know we have Jacqueline Mock of VP for Academic and Student Affairs, David Shellady, Dean of the School of Health Professions, and Karen Barnes, Chair of the department. So I guess my question is, do you assume you will also have anybody coming back who has a master's degree who wants a doctorate? Will you be able to fit them in regionally for this kind of purpose? And then my other question is, I know you have over $4 million for the cost, but how much more is that than what you're already spending on the master's program? So really, you've already got the master's program funded. How much more is really the doctorate program?
You have to push the button.
The first question, excuse me, the first question concerning master OTs transferring in, the answer is no. We are going to go straight to an entry-level doctorate and teach out those that we still have. People with masters in the profession already who are practicing therapists are able to take what's called an advanced doctoral program, which is above and beyond, and it's usually somewhere around a year or a little bit longer, but that's only for advanced. So we are doing an entry level.
But you don't see a regional need to have an advanced program for OTs who want to go ahead and get the doctorate?
There are two in the state,
right.
Texas Women's University, as well as a UTMB in Galveston.
Madam Chairwoman, please,
Yeah.
my name's Dave Shellady, and first of all, I want to thank you all very much for entertaining this proposal, which we think is very much needed. And we are going to be preparing advanced level occupational therapists for practice with minimal supervision. And the issue of what do you do with folks who already have a master's degree, who will want to get a doctoral degree in occupational therapy is something that is of concern. And what I would anticipate us doing is first advising the prospective student of their options. So one of the options would be to go and get an advanced specialty practice from a place like UTMB. But the other thing that I would anticipate us doing, but it's not right out of the gate that we plan to do it, is having a transitional program for MOTs to get their occupational therapy doctorate. That's exactly what we did with our physical therapy program at UT Health Science Center when we transitioned from a master's in physical therapy to a DPT. And we kept that transitional program open and alive for a number of years until we pretty much exhausted the population in our region of master's degree prepared PTs wanting the DPT. And I would anticipate we would do the same thing here.
Okay, that was one of my concerns. And yes, there is a huge demand in the healthcare industry for OTs. We're at a shortage even in many areas of the state. So I I'm looking for a good answer for that purpose too, along with your program, which will be very exclusive, and it will be really meeting the future, but in the interim time, we still have this need for more OTs, more skilled therapists who can work independently in, underserved areas of the state. We have a lot of underserved areas, especially for OT. So my question is about the cost, do you know?
Dean Shellady and Dr. Burns, I think you can speak to the relatively modest incremental cost because the existing faculty here in the transition, and so you are absolutely correct that the reflection in the budget does put in the total cost of the program, and so I'll let Dean Shellady and Dr. Burns speak to the incremental cost.
Well, the difference in cost between our current masters and this program is largely the addition of 1 semester hour of coursework. So this is going to be a very efficient way for somebody to get the doctorate in occupational therapy, and it's going to be something that folks are going to be facing over the next 10, 20 years. So we're going to provide a shorter route than going and getting a master's and then coming back and getting a doctorate. So in that sense, the increased incremental cost is modest, but it's 1 semester, it's 13 credit hours more than our current master's degree program. Now, the cost to the institution, we are going to transition all of our existing faculty to this new program, so there will not be any additional cost there. We are currently searching for, in hopes that this proposal is approved, 1 additional doctorally prepared occupational therapy faculty member, so that will be 1 additional FTE, and then we have some other additional costs in terms of library and a little bit of additional cost in terms of technology, but the total incremental increase is relatively small.
And currently, you graduate about how many MOTs a year?
40.
Okay.
And with respect to the workforce issue, essentially we're adding 1 semester to the length of preparing an OT, and we're going to start this program as we phase out the MOT program, and so that there's only going to be a very small break in terms of the numbers of students we graduate each year.
Yes, Mr. Steen.
So when someone completes this program, they become Dr. Joe Smith, right? They carry the title doctor, is that correct?
They can use the title doctor if they choose to do so. Now, I know a lot of folks find that confusing in some environments, particularly hospitals and individual institutions sometimes have certain rules about who can and cannot put a doctor on their nameplate because they don't want to confuse folks about who are physicians and who are not. But I kind of leave it to the institutions to sort that out.
Well, what I guess, I tend to think that if someone gets a doctorate, that I would assume that they had completed a dissertation, and so this does not require that.
Well,
you said something about
absolutely
experiential component, and it's more of maybe a question for the staff. But how often does that happen when someone can get a doctorate and not have to have a dissertation?
I think I can help you out with that. There are 2 broad categories of doctoral degrees. The PhD is a research degree and requires a dissertation, but there are a very large class of what are called professional doctorates that do not require a dissertation. Often they may require some sort of project or a research project, but an example of a professional doctorate is an MD. They don't do a dissertation. Another example is a PharmD. They do not do a dissertation. So almost none of the professional doctorates require a research dissertation. Now, we are going to encourage our students to do a modest research project, a capstone project as part of this particular program. But yes, PhD programs, and we desperately need more PhD faculty, that's for sure, but this particular program is not going to be designed to meet that need.
And I can add that all the courses are taken to at a doctoral level, and as compared to the master's, there is a competency component that is used throughout, as well as a doctoral experience, which is a complete 6 months of in the field with a capstone or scholarly, a capstone, which is a scholarly paperwork as well as presentation at the end.
You have a question? I'm sorry, question, John. You mentioned earlier a program that you kind of phased out because you've kind of met your needs. Do you anticipate this happening, or
It's
your
hard
projections?
it's hard to say. We would keep the transitional DPT in play if we had sufficient numbers of students interested in it, but they no longer, we pretty much run that group in our region. And so what I would anticipate is keeping a transitional program in play for this particular program and until we'd exhausted the demand for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Have a motion?
So moved.
Dr. Steen. Mr. Steen, John.
Doctor of Laws.
Yes, you are.
Second.
I have John made a motion and Fred made a second. Any questions? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion's approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate you coming today. Agenda item 5D5 is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to a request from West Texas A&M for a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering degree with a major in electrical engineering. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. So this is, unlike some of our previous proposals today, this is a more traditional engineering degree in electrical engineering, but it will have an emphasis in electrical power and energy systems. It is the only one within 100 miles, being in Canyon, Texas. This is a field where workforce demand poses some interesting questions for us because at first glance it appears that we may be actually producing more electrical engineers than we need. But if you look at the unemployment rates among electrical engineers, they have hovered around 2%, which it actually exceeds full employment as conceived by most economists. Would argue that somewhere really around 5% as a general rule. And I think what it points to is the fact that folks with electrical engineering degrees wind up in a lot of different fields, not just those that are specifically geared toward electrical engineering. So based on that, we think that this program is worthy and will meet a demand in the Panhandle region of Texas that is not currently necessarily being met. It's a traditional face-to-face program of 126 hours. We have some representatives here, and I'll be glad to answer any other questions you might have.
Any questions? Yes.
So, Dr. Peebles, I do know that another point, but in the utility industry, where they employ a lot of electrical engineers. If you look at it nationwide, there's a big concern that within the next 5 to 10 years, so many of the people that are in those positions are retiring.
Yeah,
I don't know if you looked into that at all. But.
Yeah, we looked into that to some extent, and so did the institution. And I think it really is true that the baby boom, which has been predicted to retire for some time now, is actually beginning to retire, and soon, and will be over the next several years. And so I think that this is one of those industries where there is going to be some growing demand for this, and particularly in light of the fact that the grid, the electrical power grid as we have is a very aging infrastructure that's probably going to need a lot of work in future years.
Yeah, I just finished a book called The Grid, written by Gretchen Bakke, and that's one of the points that she makes is that it's a sort of a crisis that all these people are retiring. So there's definitely a need out there.
I think geographically, if you look at the map where the schools are, we can see that West Texas and the Panhandle really it's very sparse. And really, the Panhandle is where all of the wind energy and all of that is happening. And any other questions? Do I have a motion? I have a motion from Mr. Steen. I have a second from Arcelia. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. At this point, we'll take a 30-minute break for lunch, and while we will have a quorum, there will be no items discussed. There will be no business and over which the board has any supervision or control. We will return in 30 minutes. Thank you. guys are eating all the snacks up there. We gotta.
That's interesting. When I lived in Midland, we had one of the lowest electric rates in the state because all that wind was generating all this power, but the grid couldn't take it to Dallas or any place that could actually use it for a long time, and so it just drove down the rates in West Texas, which was great for us. It's like, oh, this is great, but yeah, it was a really interesting deal.
Oh, your mic is on.
Good. Right. Pick back up to that 12. You're welcome to stay in the room.
Is there something you need me to do for the Yes, and yeah, I created a CAWS folder.
Welcome back. The Committee on Academic Workforce and Success will reconvene. Thank you for bearing with us. I would like to move to Agenda Item 5E. Item 5E is consideration of adopting the Uniform Pre-Nursing Curriculum Advisory Committee's recommendation to the committee relating to the report on uniform pre-nursing curriculum. We have Pamela Martin and Helen Reed, who are the co-chairs of the committee, and they will present the committee's findings. We do need approval on this, correct, Dr. Peebles? Okay. Are we ready, team? Thank you. All right, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate the opportunity to share this report with you. I was just telling Ms. Shepherd that this was a very intense committee and with representatives from across the state because it does impact a lot of nursing programs. And as a result of House Bill 3078, our committee did very much in depth look at the required courses that applicants to nursing programs need to take, whether it be a baccalaureate program or an associate degree nursing program. And we did send out a questionnaire that we developed to 26 baccalaureate programs and 54 associate degree programs with a 100% return rate. So you see how very seriously nursing leaders in the state of Texas take things like this because they very much wanted to have input into the outcomes of this report. And so with this, if you look at the two charges that were in the original bill, that to look at a set of prerequisite courses for baccalaureate and for associate degree nursing programs, we came up with a list of 7 courses for the baccalaureate nursing programs that all applicants would have to have completed in order to be, actually into a nursing program itself. We found that there were more commonalities than we originally thought when we began to look at the data, that we only found that 2 of the baccalaureate programs require a lab for micro and all but 4 require a lab for chemistry. So this is something that was very much of an in-depth conversation about the non-lab requirement for chemistry and micro because some universities don't require labs for these courses. Therefore, we have no control over different areas like this. And so we looked at this and we did look at a potential recommendation for the future of deciding whether or not chemistry needs a lab or if micro needs a lab for our nursing majors to be successful as a nurse. And so this was something not within the purview of the bill, but it was certainly a topic of conversation that we had as time went on. I'll let Dr. Reed address the prerequisites for the associate degree nursing programs.
We were able to come up with 2 courses for the associate degree nursing programs. We looked at the commonalities, so there's only 3 courses that all programs had, and so that was anatomy and physiology, and then the first English, and the other one was the creative arts or the language, philosophy, culture, but that one is usually done concurrent with the nursing program. So even though we were able to come up with these 2 courses that all the programs have, 100% of the programs would have to change their prerequisite requirements in order to go to this. But we felt that that was probably better to address the courses that everybody had rather than requiring students to change their curriculum because due to the accreditation requirements, the faculty are supposed to set the curriculum, and we didn't want to make those changes, a recommendation for those changes.
In relation to charge 2, that of the content of prerequisite courses, once again, we do not control the content of these courses because these are courses that are taught in other departments. And so therefore, we have provided you with a list of the courses as an appendix from the Lower Division Academic Course Guide Manual, ACGM, because nursing has no control over the content of those classes. Therefore, the requirement for these courses is whatever they took at that particular institution would be accepted, based on that content. We also looked at the issue of transferring course credits, that for students who had taken courses, at other institutions, that the receiving institution would take that course based on what they had completed, and 100% of the programs responded that yes, they would take that course. So this was the charges that we feel as though we very much in depth looked at this and considered what the programs have right now and what is available. We, of course, don't control the Texas core, so therefore, if a student's required to take an art course that's required at that particular institution because they're not core complete, that is something that for nursing we have no control over. And so therefore, they're going to have to take those courses to become core complete at that particular institution in order to graduate. So we did not look into the core or anything like this because that was not as a part of the bill. You will see that we did come up with some assumptions with this in the report. So we wanted to be sure that everyone understood that there are inherent differences in associate degree nursing education and in baccalaureate degree nursing education. The Texas Board of Nursing has the differentiated essentials that, based on your level of education, that is how we are expected to, guide our curriculum based on if it's associate degree or if it's baccalaureate degree. We also have two different national accrediting bodies that have certain standards that we have to meet. Therefore, that brings in some other types of differences, with this also. The Texas Board of Nursing says that nursing faculty own their curriculum. Therefore, we make the decisions about, within our curriculum, how we run our courses. We had great discussions about the differences, the geographic differences across Texas, and how our programs philosophically relate to those needs in those areas, and that the missions of our institutions, we relate to those needs of our institutions. So this is how we look at this. And as Dr. Reed said, some of these, that if it were something that was going to mandate a change, every program in the state would have to go through curricular change, to do this. So these are some of the findings that we came up with.
There's also selection processes for each of the programs. So just because the students have completed the prerequisite courses, it just means they're going to be considered for application. It does not guarantee acceptance.
I have a question, Dr. Peoples. Does this fulfill, they did a lot of work with some
They did, and, I served on that
tough
committee.
customers, I'm sure.
And so I know they did a lot of work.
Right.
And as the only male on that committee, I felt very privileged and
Well, I'm just asking,
And-
does this fulfill our goal of what we were trying to do and what the legislature's intent was?
Yes, I think it does, because the legislative intent was born out of frustration at going to different institutions and being told that there were different sets of prerequisites. And so, and the legislation itself asked for a recommendation for this. And so I think it fulfills the legislation in the sense that the committee did arrive at the 7 courses and the 2 courses that would constitute a common pre-nursing advisory, or the pre-nursing curriculum, I'm sorry. And I should point out that one of the things that we're going to do with this is that we're now in the process of establishing a nursing field of study, and then we hope to take this work and then move into actually then looking at nursing courses to get some more commonality among those as well.
What if you have a school then that doesn't honor this approach?
Well, the legislation asked that, all it asked was that the coordinating board submit a recommendation. And otherwise, it didn't have any, it does not have any language in it about, such as you would find under field of study or core curriculum that applies to some kind of mandatory transfer or applicability.
So it's your recommendation that this would go back to the legislature and that it would be then formalized into something that the coordinating board can then monitor and really,
If that's their wish.
well, not just monitor, but really make it happen. Yeah, that's the goal. Any other closing comments? Any questions by anybody else?
Just had a question about just overall, your sense of all of the hard work. Do you feel like there's more work to be done? Did you discover other levels of this, or I guess want your thoughts on how good you feel about the report you're presenting today and responding to the legislature.
I guess it would depend on what other charges come back afterwards in terms of what
But at
needs
this
to be
point-
done, yes.
I think we as a committee felt very good about what we did. I assure you, it was a lot of discussion, and
It's a very complex.
it is, yeah.
Situation in terms of you've got accreditation issues. So, like associate degree programs can be no more than 6 semesters. And so if they have 5 semesters already with nursing courses, then you can only have 1 for, prerequisites. And so it's very complicated.
I think, and I mentioned, going back, we decided that, the recommendation of, do we need labs with our science classes? Are those things actually enhancing their learning process? We didn't know the answer to that because, there was only the very few little schools that didn't require a lab. With changes to the core, a lot of our universities have dropped labs, but they're willing to offer a lab for us because we require a lab for our science classes. So it's just it's kind of a can of worms for nursing. It always has been, and it's just something that we have always dealt with. And
One of those things that's just the way it's always been done. And so we
But it
want to know
doesn't-
what is the
yeah,
evidence
yeah.
and whether we
Yeah.
should or shouldn't.
And
Just-
looking in the future to see what can change, because nursing curriculum changes all the time. We are not stagnant. Anybody in this state will tell you they are consistently revising and updating their curriculum to meet changing needs. Our national accreditation standards change, so we have to change. Every 3 years, the National Council Licensure Exam ups the passing bar for the exam. So we get about a 2-year run to increase the rigor in our program so that our students are successful. So it's a constant revision and change and upgrade and trying to meet the needs.
Interesting. No, given what you said, thinking if I were a student, how can a student expect to really know going forward if changes are being made every 2 years? We do know, aside from the area you're looking at, that there have been issues for many years in terms of transferring from one program to another. Nursing programs look a lot more different from one institution to another than you think, which makes me think about how, if you're having to follow the recommendations of these national groups, why every program can look so different, yet at the same time they're all following the same standards. How do we make this work for students is what I'm wondering. And that's what you were primarily about, but beyond what you did here, how do we help students? We've had a shortage of nurses for probably as long as everybody here has been alive, maybe collectively, going back centuries.
Profession.
So do you have, this isn't your role, but this is very important. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts beyond your own study.
I think the transfer has become easier, and particularly in this state, because the baccalaureate and the associate degree programs here, and all of us work together very, very well. We all get along very well. And one of the bigger issues is if a student comes out of what's called a concept-based curriculum, where they teach bits and pieces across the curriculum. They don't teach, like a medical surgical course. They teach it across every course. That student transferring, say, into my program is going to have to go back and pick up courses because they have missed half the content in order to move into courses in my curriculum. Those students do run into major issues if they do transfer from one type of way the curriculum is set up to another. Now, transferring into programs has become much easier. If they're in it, we accept that credit. They pick up where they would have been in the program that they were in before. They're not made to go back and take courses that they've already completed with a passing grade. It is an easier process. I'm not saying it works 100%.
They still have to pass the exam.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, John.
To thank you for this impressive report, and of course you volunteered to do this. And give me some sense of how much time this took, how many meetings, and what.
We have five meetings,
We started
I
in
think.
January and ended in August. Yeah, about five or six meetings. Yeah.
Good. Well,
5 all-day.
Yeah. But I think it also reflects the dedication of nurses in this Texas to the education of students, and we want to do for the students. It's not about us, it's about them being successful.
Well, thank you. Of course, the board members here are volunteers too, so
That's
we
right.
put a lot of time into it. But just to
do.
know how much we appreciate it, and it's an impressive report, and I guess you need a motion to approve.
Yes, I would like to say that this should serve as an example for other fields of study and our ability to try and make it easier for students to transfer, and because it's a mobile world, and no one's always promised that they can just stay one place to finish out their education. So yes, I need a motion. Dr. Steen, I keep wanting.
I'm liking that. Keep going.
Yeah, I know. And we have a second from Dr. Farias. And anyway, any questions, discussion? All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you again for coming. Appreciate you. All right. Agenda item 5F is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the progress report on success of students at institutions of higher education who receive credit from advanced placement exams. Dr. Peoples.
In the 84th Texas legislature, there was a bill passed that requires institutions who accept AP in credit to require a score of no more than 3 unless there is evidence supporting the notion that a score of higher than 3 is necessary to subsequent success in courses. And so the coordinating board was charged with the implementation of this particular piece of legislation, and there are 2 reports associated with it. And this is the first of those 2 reports. This is a progress report, and then the final report is due in 2019, and it will actually take a much more in-depth look at that relationship between AP scores and AP tests are scored 1 to 5, essentially. And so some institutions have required scores of 4s or 5 in order to get credit for the exam, but the legislation mandated a maximum score of 3 unless there's evidence to support, again, the notion that subsequent courses, students to be successful in those need to have a score of higher than 3. And so institutions have provided us with their crosswalks, and those institutions that were requiring more than a 3 that have not compiled any evidence for it have reduced their scores to 3. But I would also, I believe that a lot of institutions are in the process or will be in the process of studying this issue and looking at whether a 3 is really a good enough score to advance in subsequent coursework or not. So this is very much a preliminary report. All but 2 institutions responded, and it turns out that those 2 institutions are community colleges who don't accept AP credit primarily because they rarely get requests for it. AP credit is much more common to present to a 4-year institution than it is to a 2-year institution for credit.
There has been concern about rigor and who's teaching the courses. Commissioner, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, I was a trustee of the college board when this issue came up, and there was a dramatic expansion of AP, and there was a decline in the training that the college board provided teachers. And sure enough, what started happening is that institutions started raising the score they would accept, and then some schools like MIT said they wouldn't accept those AP courses at all for credit. And I think the College Board made a very thoughtful effort to try to bring the rigor back up, but there's an inherent contradiction between expansion and maintaining rigor. So I think it's an issue that concerns it's an issue that concerns elite universities more than any other. It's not the regional universities will balk at accepting the 3, but I think it's very important that we maintain data and that we have evidence to support whatever position or whatever program we have to monitor as a result of legislation. Same principle applies to dual credit.
I was just going to bring it. Do you want to clarify about dual credit, exactly what is the difference between AP and dual credit?
Well, AP, simply, the big difference is they're supposed to be college courses. The difference is that AP teachers are high school teachers typically, and they're supposed to have been trained in what these courses are supposed to be like in terms of rigor, in terms of content, and in terms of pace. And dual credit, and in order to get credit for the course, you have to take the exam and you have to pass it at a level of 3 or higher. The difference with dual credit courses is that the courses are typically, this is less the case now than before, are taught by college or university faculty, and the course and the grade in the course is what you get credit for. So there's not that extra exam, which discourages a lot of poor kids because the test costs money.
And let me add to the exam part that does control for the expansion to a large extent and who's teaching the courses, because there is a common exam there in which you don't have a common exam with dual credit. And I think, Raymond said that, I just wanted to emphasize that's a big difference.
Right, but as far as, I'm trying to, because this is a big topic, and it's one we're going to be talking about a whole bunch, I think, in the coming time. But, with the AP, that exam is kind of the gatekeeper that says they did or they did not. To me, that's very, very important. And in my mind, it's a huge delineation between was the information captured and understood versus a dual credit course. Well, I got the credit regardless of who taught. It's not the same. And I don't know, it just seems the bar is higher for the AP course because you know that they have mastered to a certain level. And if 3 is the number, that's fine. And I understand the difference between different institutions. But I think that's going to be the big piece that we're going to be talking a lot about here in the coming years.
So the recommendation from this report is basically that we're going to track.
Yes.
And you're not making the recommendation that makes it mandatory for all schools to accept the score of 3.
It's too soon.
Well, the legislation has already done that mandates they accept a score of 3 unless they have evidence that would show that students with a 3 perform at lower levels than students with the 4 or that are not adequately prepared for subsequent courses.
And nobody could produce that.
It's too new.
It's too new.
But and it's at their institution.
Yes.
Right?
At their institution. Right.
And I guess that's where the barometer is there that I understand. And okay, so that makes sense to me. So the recommendations will be tracking that, or they'll be tracking it.
Just to add, an important distinction would be, for example, in chemistry. So if you're a chemistry major, it may be critical. They can find as they begin to track that if you don't score a 4 or a 5, that you're not going to do well in subsequent course. But if you're going to major in another field, the 3 is perfectly acceptable. And that could vary by institution. So that's why it's very complicated.
Other questions or thoughts?
You need a motion to adopt the staff recommendations.
I have a motion and a second by Arcelia. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Thank you. Item 5G is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the report on developmental education. Jarrell.
Good afternoon. I'm Jarrell Booker, Assistant Commissioner, College Ratings and Success. I'm requesting the board's approval to accept the staff's recommendation on report on developmental ed. As you may know, the 84th legislature required us to do a report on basically finding best practice around developmental ed and acceleration through Rider 42. In addition, there was a Senate Bill 1776 that required us to look at the college preparatory course from House Bill 5 that K-12 and institutions of higher ed were required to partner to develop these college prep courses for those who did not show college readiness. So we combined both of those into this report. And basically what we recommended to the legislature, which we have to submit this report to, is that we should accelerate certain practices that have shown success, which are around integrated reading and writing, NCBOs or non-course competency-based options, mainstreaming and co-requisite models when it makes sense for certain campuses, We also are asking the legislature to consider adjusting how they necessarily fund development education, maybe possibly create incentives for increasing the time to getting through that first class, maybe to a year or less. And lastly, make sure that these institutions of higher ed are working closely with TEA and K-12 school districts to make sure they increase college readiness for high school graduates. It's, as we've talked about previously, their accountability is more about high school graduation, and we want to actually take that step further and make sure they're college ready, not just high school graduation.
Any questions or discussion? Huge report. This is very important.
What about the condition of the college prep courses?
It's interesting that out of the first year out of the box, obviously we didn't have a large number who went through that through House Bill 5, but no surprise, students who didn't show enough college readiness, then trying to track them to the ones who actually attended our institutions is a very small number. But the numbers are, you could kind of expect them not to be in the same category of those who weren't college ready. And the small numbers we have actually show that.
Might want to mention the meeting with Dana Center, which isn't in this report that we just had.
The Dana Center is actually reviewing these courses also and working very closely with them around, particularly on the math side of things, to make sure that these students are getting what they need at the high school level, and then depending on what their major they're taking once they get to college, that it's actually appropriate for them. Similar to what David was talking about with the AP exam, if you're going to be a chemistry major, you need high-level science and chemistry, but maybe not so much if you're, a different major. So the Dana Center is working on this also because it's very important that they get what they need at the high school level.
So this will be a big part of 60 by 30,
Definitely.
helping us get there. Any questions? I need a motion. Fred has given us a motion. I have a second from John. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 5H is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the report on recruitment of persons with intellectual and developmental disabilities at institutions of higher education. Dr. Booker.
Also from the 84th legislature, we were required to study how our public institutions recruit students with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We sent out a survey and we had a 67% response rate, which is pretty good for the first time out for the survey. And what we found are a few things. 17 institutions engaged in some form of recruitment, actively targeting students with IDD. 8 institutions have special programs for this population of students. And over 80% of the institutions who actually responded are specifically distribute information about program and services for this population. Now, part of the surveys, we didn't ask what you do. We also find out if you don't, why aren't you? And the inability of students with IDD to attend recruitment activities based off of unavailability of transportation. So that's something both K-12 and higher ed are looking at trying to alleviate. The other is the underpreparation of incoming students with IDD as they transition to higher education. And a major issue is the lack of financial aid for students enrolling in certain types of these transitional programs. There's just not the funds there for them to actually attend the programs that some of the institutions are actually promoting. What's most exciting about this is our data division is actually, Dr. Julie Eklund's allowed us to track this going forward and maybe look at their outcomes long term, not just whether they're being recruited, but their outcomes once they enter in some of these programs, and we'll probably be able to do that beginning in 2018.
What does, you say IDD, so it's intellectual and development disabilities, what does that encompass?
It's characterized by, I guess, significant limitations in intellectual and kind of their functioning. So it could be reasoning, it could be learning, it could be adaptive behavior, it could be severe cognitive, physical disabilities. It's a number of different characteristics that fall under this category. Children with Down syndrome may be considered IDD. So it's a spectrum of it. Some people can highly function in certain certification programs and workforce and others, it might be more of a struggle. So it kind of runs the gamut.
Thank you.
The recommendation is, again,
It's really, the recommendation is to adopt a report. We're only required to report that we found out this
Get a survey.
information, and then the legislature can actually decide what they want to do at that
but
point.
you didn't really, did you really list here what kind of degrees or certifications they may be achieving?
Not yet. What we
Okay.
have is, there's a list in the report, in the survey, and you'll see the survey questions about how they're doing. They really wanted to look at their recruitment. We've actually gone a step further, at least kind of look at outcomes, but they didn't even ask for that from the law.
There is one request for, on the letterhead, it has Ricky Raven as being from McAllen, so that would be a correction before it goes to the legislature.
We'll make that change.
Okay, just a clerical error. Anybody else? Questions, thoughts? A motion? I have a motion from Fred, second from Arcilia. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Let's see, 5J was on the consent calendar. 5K is consideration to adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to the report on the assessment of graduate medical education positions. Dr. Peebles.
See, I'm going to let Dr. Silverman handle this one.
Okay.
In the report. So if you look at Figure 10, you can see that the coordinating board's required to report back to the legislature every other year. This report's due December 1st. And we really, it's just an assessment of whether or not we have 10% more GME first-year filled positions to the number of Texas medical graduates that we're producing each year. So Figure 10 actually shows, I'll walk you through that. The green line is actually the medical school graduates. So you can see up through 2015, which those are certified data. 16 data have not been certified yet. So you can see the growth that is projected of our medical school graduates in the coming years. You can see that for many years, well, you actually don't see this on this piece of paper, but I can tell you that the 10 years preceding 2012, we graduated about 1,100 medical students annually for a very long time. And we've seen growth because we've seen an increase in most all of our medical school enrollments, in addition to opening some new medical schools. Now, these projections out after 2016 include the increased enrollment from UT Austin's Dell Medical School, as well as RGV, UT RGV, and it also includes the class size of 120 from University of Incarnate Word. So it does not include what we think will be an additional 80 or so students at the TCU UNT Partnership Medical School. So that school is going to open in 2018. So while Incarnate Word's going to open in next summer or fall, they're going to be able to admit students this spring. So the next line shows the actual number of first-year filled GME positions in Texas. You can see that numbers are real up through 2015, and the next line is, the next row is a projection. So you can see that we're keeping pace really with GME. We fell a little bit below in 2013, but if we don't do something, which we have done, and if we don't maintain what we've done, you can see that the numbers will not fare well, and we'll be sending out medical students who've graduated from our schools to other states, and we might not get them back. So the orange dotted line shows where we are for this coming year. In fiscal year 2016, we actually made some great progress, so that you can see, because of the GME expansion effort, we increased that number of first-year field residency positions. And we are again on track to do that for this fiscal year, this current fiscal year. So the top line is that goal line. That is the line of 10% more first-year entering field residency positions than medical school graduates in the state. So that really addresses the first three items on that we're tasked to do on this report, which really is compare the number of first-year medical positions to graduates, and give a trend analysis, and then also the strategies that we need, which those strategies have included the development of planning grants. And I'm pleased to say that beginning in fiscal year 14 and 15, we awarded 9 planning grants, and we've had, as a result, had 8 new accredited residency programs, which is pretty amazing. Additionally, we funded, beginning in 2014, we funded 25 unfilled residency positions, and those were positions that were available to residency programs but had not been filled because programs couldn't afford to fill them. So those have been maintained and have continued, and this, in fiscal year 16, we funded 200 residency positions. So, and we anticipate that number going to 486 in fiscal year 17.
Just looking at your recommendations at the back, I'm not going to pretend to be Dr. Tesher, but I know what his comments will be. Do we have the opportunity to say, I see you're talking about recommendation, number 3, maintaining funding support for the programs, establish, expand medical education opportunities, and encourage medical school innovation. What do you mean by that?
So we do have the Primary Care Innovation Program, and those programs are doing some really innovative models. Texas Tech has done a fast track so that you're reducing the time to complete a medical school degree by a year. UNT is doing an outreach to a community college to try and streamline the length of time that it would take for a community college student to obtain a doctor of osteopathic medicine. So those are some of the innovations. We want to maintain those. But the big takeaway is that our baseline funding, which is $53 million, would not cover all the existing residency positions that we are going to be supporting in fiscal year 17.
I was hoping that your medical school innovation would actually be that the pipeline that has, how many new dreams of medical schools in this state, they would not come to us until they had a GME plan. Could we make that a recommendation?
We certainly could.
Well, I'm going to just say that I know if Dr. Tesher were here, this is really something that we feel really strongly about. We've talked about it many times, that the medical schools don't come to us with request until they actually have the plan for the GME to meet their needs. And that really shouldn't be our responsibility to go out and be trying to dig up programs for them to send their graduates to. It really should be part of their universal plan to begin with. I do know that TCU has been really actively working on that. I do also assume that eventually they're going to come to us and ask for formula funding to support their program. So, thoughts?
Well, yeah.
It's a TCU UNT.
Well, and
the
that
UNT
was-
part of it would
I had a
come to-
question about that, because if there's a combination.
Eventually, they're going to come and
With a
want
public
money.
school and a private school, you know, who's taking the lead? And you did mention, I'm going to go back to the number of graduates right now, 1,200 approximately?
Actually, no, we're up to
You mentioned-
1392.
Almost
no,
1,400, I think.
Almost
Yeah.
1,400?
Not
Yeah, 'cause
quite.
your graph shows,
Sorry, 1692.
yeah, your graph shows 16, it's almost 1,600, that's what I was saying.
Right.
Okay, so you mentioned the UNT TCU in the fall of, what was their projection?
2017.
And that's 80 students, or was that 80 students at Incarnate Word?
120, I believe, but I haven't, that is what I've gotten from news articles.
Okay, so we haven't, the coordinating board has not received any information.
No, we have not. Nor have we received a request, but they are a private school, so they don't
Okay.
have to come to us for approval.
Right, that's what I'm saying, but there's a UNT portion, so that's...
That's a public school, so.
Right. So, but there's been no proposal, I guess, formal proposal.
Not submitted to us.
Okay. So you're just projecting kind of out of that, what you've read?
That's correct.
Okay, and what about Incarnate Word?
They have not submitted, they're again a private entity.
Right.
And I did hear their dean talk about that they would have 120 students enrolling in the fall.
Okay, and you just kind of took that information for your projections?
But they may
That's
not
correct.
have a GME plan.
No, but they have been opening
They-
residency programs. Yes.
Just to
And
clarify,
I will say that there have been many residency programs that have been opening and have been growing.
Right.
But
just to clear, in terms of Incarnate Word, that's totally a private school
Right.
issue, and they have to deal with their own accreditor in terms of increasing their level that they're allowed to award. But you're absolutely right, it has a bearing on the GME and the state, and we have to be able to take that into account.
absolutely. I will also note that the report shows that Texas has 11 medical schools right now, with 2 coming online, and we are behind New York and California. New York has 16, and California they have 12, but 4 more coming online. But the difference is that we have, 10 public medical schools, and they each have 6. So it is very different.
Is the UNT TCU combination DO
It is not. It will be awarding the MD degree.
and Incarnate Word DO?
It is a DO program, yes.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take any other questions.
I would like to have that recommendation, though, included as maybe embedded in one of your others, or along with, or added, or...
Absolutely. I'll add
Okay.
it.
Any other discussion? Take a motion?
Motion.
I have a motion and a second by John. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion carries. Thank you so much. All right, 5L and 5N, we're on the consent calendar. 5O is a report on the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Improvement Act funds to colleges for basic and leadership grants. Are there any questions? Dr. Peebles is here to answer on that report.
And I'll just give you a very quick, brief summary of this. This involves 2 basic pieces to Perkins funding and about $25 million a year of federal funds. And first is basic funds that go to institutions based on the number of students they have enrolled in career and technical education programs and the number of those students that are awarded Pell Grants. And those funds are primarily used for equipment purchases, but also a substantial portion of those funds go to serve special populations in the form of everything from readers to tutors to childcare to so on. And then the other piece of it is leadership grants, and there's about $800,000 plus worth of leadership grants in this round of funding. And those are primarily go to institutions to try to provide innovative curriculum, to try to explore ways to increase non-traditional students in career and technical education programs. Some of it is also revolves around the work that we do with the workforce education course manual and the review of programs as well. And I will leave it at that and then answer any questions you might have.
This is a report only. We don't need a vote.
Yes, it's a report on.
All right, questions? All right, agenda item 5P is a report to the Committee on School Closures and/or Teach-Outs pursuant to Chapter 7, Subchapter A, Section 7.75. Dr. Peebles.
This is an information item as well. On the first page of your blue pages, there are two campuses of Brown Mackie College listed there that are in phase-out and will be closed. And so far, they have done exactly what they're supposed to do. Transcripts will be available through their parent corporation. They have provided for teach-out. On the second page, however, ITT Technical Institute is listed, and since this blue page was written, all of that information there is
Outdated.
outdated. ITT has since declared bankruptcy, as many of you know, and our efforts now are focused on trying to secure the student records.
There's some big, huge, empty buildings up in the Metroplex right now.
Yes, and
They'll be on for sale.
there's some in Dallas and Houston and
Big
San
buildings,
Antonio.
yeah.
Yep.
Dr. Peoples, what are we doing in that regard?
Well, since they've declared bankruptcy,
Pretty big problem, that, like, they're over.
Yes.
It says here 3,200 students, yeah.
they had 3,200 students enrolled this past year, and of course, student records go back since the inception of ITT, which they've been around for a long time. And we estimate that there may be as many as 6,000 boxes of student records out there in the state of Texas alone. And there's also an additional number of student records since 2001 that have been put into digital format. But since they've declared bankruptcy, everything is now in the hands of bankruptcy court. And so I believe that our own Attorney General's office has filed a motion to retrieve the student records so that they can be put in the hands of the separate states who will have control over the student records from the entities in their state. So I think at this point, we've pursued all the legal means that we can, and we've also started exploring then, of course, what we will do with these when we get them. ITT had a company called SafeSite where they had previously stored records, and it looks like it might be, at least in the short run, a viable option to continue to store records with them and then take the records that are located at those 10 locations in Texas and move them to SafeSite. And then, of course, we have an exceptional item request before the legislature to increase the staffing available to us, but also for the funds to establish a repository for student records in Texas so that, in essence, we would be able to give a student a transcript if they needed one.
So you said you believe the Attorney General had filed?
They did, yes.
Yes, sir, Mr. Steen. We enlisted the aid of the Attorney General as soon as I think the following day after the declaration of bankruptcy, particularly since they're going into Chapter 7, which means they're going to be liquidated. And all of their corporations are going into the same Chapter 7 proceedings. A bankruptcy trustee has been appointed. She has issued a letter directing the landlords not to allow, at this point, access to anything that could be considered an asset of ITT or its affiliated corporations. We expect, however, that our motion through the Attorney General's office will be acted on with reasonable haste, and that we will be allowed access to those files. And as Dr. Peebles pointed out, SafeSite has a number of those records already. It's a private concern. And the state of Texas, I am advised, presently enjoys a contract with SafeSite for other records. So we don't need to go through a long drawn-out contractual process, as I understand it, in order to enter into an agreement with SafeSite to help us. We'll keep you advised, but at this point, that's the status. We were on a conference call with the United States Department of Education yesterday afternoon, and they were basically seeking a lot of information from the various states. And it seems like virtually all other states, with maybe one exception, that has been able to access ITT records in its state for the most part so far, are in the same positions we're in, we probably filed the motion to get access to the records with the bankruptcy court as quickly, if not more so, than anybody else.
Thank you so much. This is, such a burden on these students, and thank you for staying right on top of it.
Yes, sir.
And to that point, John, what are we hearing from students? Are we fielding a lot of calls? Is there a lot of, how are we handling that influx of additional work that we're doing?
We've set up a phone line for that purpose, and we have received a number of calls. Students both wanting to know about what to do about getting their own student records, which at this point there's nothing we can do about, and also students wanting to know about transfer and that kind of thing. We've had a lot of cooperation from particularly community colleges across the state of Texas that have volunteered to work with these students to try to take them in and take as much credit as they can. So we have provided links to those institutions, and we've sent out a number of emails to the students to try to get them in touch with the folks that can help them.
So along those lines, and I'm just curious because I don't know how this works. So I'm a student and I've got certain records of my own, I guess, or do I? Or what does that student have that he can take to a community college that is stored somewhere else that, that they would work with him? I'm just curious as to how that process can be facilitated to expedite the process.
Well, there's a couple of things. I suspect that a lot of students, upon hearing that ITT was in deep trouble, asked for transcripts as the door was closing behind them, so to speak. But students who are those that were conscientious enough to keep their grade reports and that kind of thing, so they do have something they can take to an institution, and until the institution can get some kind of official transcript that verifies their credit, they can at least look at that, and there's also probably still a lot of public information that was available or still is available about the content of those courses, so that institutions can do a side-by-side comparison and look at whether those courses match up or not.
What happens to the confidential information of every student? Generally, do you have any idea that is enrolled at ITT? All of that personal kind of information.
Well, that's a good question, and what we would ask for, of course, is anything that's related to their grades, anything that we would need to be able to supply the student with a transcript. But you're right that there are probably other financial records there. And I would, and Bill may be able to speak to this better than I can, but I would expect the bankruptcy court to issue orders about where those records go and who needs to take custody of them, so that confidentiality is protected.
And I guess that's kind of where my question was going, is what kind of risk is there in us taking possession of some of that information, if there's any at all?
And I do not, and honestly, I don't know what the answer to that is. Now, state statute, as I understand it, requires us to provide in some way for the student records, at least for their academic records.
Sure.
The financial records and otherwise, I really don't know the answer to that.
But we do know they're in basically three places, as Rick said. They're at Safe Site, they're with Parchment, which is electronic, and some are in boxes at the facilities. We went to the local facility, and there were probably 11 filing cabinets that we saw, and then probably 5 or 6 boxes just on the floor in a cubicle. So they're in 3 different states, and we don't know in the other sites in Texas. But the reality, this is a serious problem for the student who has debt. They've put in a lot of time, and so one of the reasons we had asked for money for a repository is somebody has to take responsibility for this. But right now, we actually face an issue. If we're able to get possession of all the files, how do we pay for their storage even? And then how do we sort through and get students to those records? In fact, how do we sort through all the records? Because we don't know at this point how they're stored in terms of what's financial records, what's student records, what's vendor, records in terms of what they owe to vendors. There's just a whole series of things. So, and I should point out that part of our discussion is anticipating that given what may happen to ITT's accreditor, that we may be having to do this in the future. And so parallel process is anticipating going forward that there may in fact be some more closures like
Ironically,
this.
we kind of anticipated some issues 2 years ago. We
Correct.
began talking about this and how maybe we needed to have a bigger, but a good segue into our next agenda item.
Question
John?
for our council. Are we it in terms of helping these students? I mean, is there anybody else helping them with this terrible situation they're in?
Actually, the federal government is stepping up and doing quite a bit. It has published on the Department of Education's website a number of ways in which the students can seek and obtain assistance. It has already begun discussions concerning extinguishing their loans if they were unable or precluded from graduating and they cannot transfer their credits to another institution for various reasons. As Dr. Peebles pointed out, we are it in terms of notifying the students through our website of a number of other institutions in Texas that will accept these credits and will allow the students to transfer and will assist in the process. I'm pleased to say that a number of community colleges have really stepped up, and they came forward within days of this transpiring and offered the students assistance in whatever way they could. And so there's a number of other avenues that have been made available to the students, and it's going to be up to the students to choose among different alternatives.
Good. Well, Commissioner, I want to just compliment the staff on the job they're doing in this area. It's important, and it sounds like you all just got right on it and are doing all the right things, so thank you very much.
Very good. Agenda item 5Q is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to revising fees for certificate of authority applications, amendments, and renewals pursuant to Texas Education Code Section 61.305, 61.307, and 61.308. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. As you point out, Texas Education Code in Section 61 gives us the authority to levy fees for the cost associated with certificates of authority, for the renewal of certificates of authority, and then also for looking at the amendments to certificates of authority. Those fees were set first in 2003, and they have not increased, or the current level of fees was set in 2003. They haven't been increased since then. And what we've discovered is that it takes, for a while we didn't really have any applications for certificate of authority, and so it wasn't much of an issue. We currently have 2 that are in the works. We suspect that there will be more. And as Dr. Gardner pointed out, with the demise of, or the possible demise of the accrediting body of ACCIC, the alternatives that those institutions will have will be to either seek accreditation with another accreditor recognized by the state, or they'll seek a certificate of authority. So we may be getting more of these as well. In the current fee of $5,000 for the application fee and a renewal fee, and $500 for an amendment, is just not adequate enough to cover our cost and to also pay for the cost of the consultants that we bring in to look at these institutions. For certificates of authority, we in effect act as an accrediting body, because these are institutions that do not have accreditation with one of our recognized accreditors, and so it falls on us to act as an accreditor, and that means that we need to bring in folks who are subject matter experts, and they can fill in the expertise that we might not have on staff, and it can really give a third-party sort of objective look at these institutions and help us make a determination about their viability. And so we wind up using our own funds, so to speak, to provide for this. So what we would request then is to raise those fees to $5,000 plus the travel expenses incurred, and for an amendment, which oftentimes does require a visit as well, because an amendment may be a substantive change to add a program or programs to a current institution, and that would be $500 plus travel expenses incurred.
Let me add one clarification. This is the road to accreditation, because they cannot continue on this path. So that after 8 years, if they're not accredited, it ends for them. So the role is to help get them to that point, but at a certain level, if they're not accredited, we're not working with them additionally.
We've gone 13 years without an increase in the actual application fee. Are we sure that we don't want to increase that at least to cover our expenses to where we are not just digging ourselves in a hole after 13 years? You're sure we don't need an increase?
Well, we really believe that the $5,000 will cover our staff time involved, but it certainly won't cover the consultants.
Travel and the other
travel and the
expenses, yeah.
consultants' fees and that kind of thing.
So you're not really increasing, is that right? You're not increasing the fee. You're just saying the fee remains the same, but then you're going to add travel expenses on top of it?
Well, right now, we're restricted to a flat rate of $5,000, and that would include not only the staff costs, but also all travel costs, both for us and for consultants as well. So it's sort of capped at $5,000.
I just looked this
But I
over
understand what you're
quickly.
saying.
So the fee stays the same. What you're just saying is not, but we're going to pull we're going to say plus travel expenses now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You need a motion?
Well, but I have a question. Currently, so if one of these schools goes out of business, what covers those expenses where we then have to go collect the records, we have to store the records, so really, does $5,000 cover? And how often do they have to renew?
They have to renew every 2 years.
Every 2 years.
And the $5,000 is not designed at all to cover the cost of trying to recover records or anything. This is strictly to cover the cost of their application and renewals.
What if we had the original application be $10,000, then the renewals continue at $5,000? It gives us at least a budget of something to work with. We don't think that the legislature is going to actually fund us very well to take care of the messes. And that's really what ends up being in our lap, is we've got the mess. Give us some housekeeping funds. Oh, maybe the legislature is going to give us money.
We shall see. A couple of clarifications. One thing is that we are talking about certificates of authority here. So we do not have any authority to assess fees on certificates of authorization. So I just wanted to clarify that. As part of for the for-profits. But then in terms of your legislative recommendations, you have recommended to the legislature that we do have increased oversight of the for-profit sector, including the creation of this transcript repository. And then as part of the exceptional item requests, we are requesting $750,000 for staff and technology costs associated with that. Now, one of the things about the recommendation, though, is that we are going to specify how the for-profits provide their records to us, and that's going to be electronically. Now, we did not, when we developed this exceptional item request, include consideration of something like the situation we have with ITT, where they don't exist anymore, and we have an unknown number of boxes of documents that have to be dealt with.
And let me add to that, part of what we're discussing is, and you will be seeing some proposals, I believe, for modification of our existing rules where we have authority to address some of these things. Staff actually has a draft, first draft of that, anticipating some of these things and even what form. One thing that we have in rules that staff hasn't really put out there is we can determine what form the records are in. And so we're going to develop specific directions so that that reduces the cost if electronic records come in terms of adding them to an electronic system. So there are a lot of pieces moving right now, and some of it we think will need to do or have to do legislatively, and some of it we think we can do by rule. And some of it will reflect some of your discussions over the past 2 years that now may be possible
Okay.
that were not then. So, and if you have any additional suggestions, please let us know.
I'm fine with the recommendation.
So John, just a really quick point of clarification. So the 750 that you mentioned, is that per year, or is that per incident, or is that?
That's a biennial number. And also to clarify a point, so our legislative recommendation, the EIR is the amount we're asking from state GR in lieu of charging a fee. So we're seeking to fund our oversight through state general revenue instead of through a fee process for certificates of authorization.
Yeah, and the exceptional item request really was developed to cover this kind of situation. Now, I don't know that we thought about it in terms of the magnitude of this situation, and particularly what may happen as a result of the accrediting body going under. But that was the thought in mind, because we also know that there are schools that have closed in Texas over the years, and we have for-profit institutions that really out of the goodness of their heart maintain those records for folks and would love to, most of them would love to give that up.
I'd love to give them to us.
And so, so it's a little tricky about whether that's enough money or not. We may very well find out. But again, the fees in this particular motion, in this particular item, are really geared at what does it cost us to process certificates of authority in the first place, and the amendments attached to them that may come later in their renewals. So.
Questions or discussion other? I need a motion.
I'll move.
I have a motion from John, a second from Arcelia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. I appreciate your help. Items 5R through U are on the consent calendar. Item 5V1 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 5, Subchapter B, Sections 5.21 through 5.25 of Board Rules concerning preliminary planning notifications. Yes,
So on this, what was the reason these aren't on the consent agenda?
because we have comments.
We do have comments.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. You may recall that this particular item is in response to board concerns raised about particularly high-dollar programs that result not only in an instructional program being created, but may also lead to considerable investment in facilities and or equipment and faculty and so forth. And so we did receive several comments to our first set of rules. There were comments that generally fell into 4 categories. And I think there was a lot of points that were well taken in the comments. A lot of the comments revolved around the notion that we were asking for information that would only be available after they had actually begun to plan for something. And I think there's I think that's an argument that has a lot of merit to it. And so we have changed a lot of the language that revolves around that, and I'll point that out in a moment. There was also comments about the being duplicative of our existing review efforts in the sense that it seemed to be asking for a lot of the same information, or would be asking for a lot of the same information at 2 different stages. And it's hard to submit a lot of that information before the planning actually begins, because you don't know what it is. And of course, some of this revolves around the notion of, and we talked about this a lot internally as staff, about what constitutes planning, and does it start when a department chair goes to their dean and says, I got this great idea for a program? Well, probably not. The planning probably starts later, when other people in the in the institution say, yeah, maybe that really is a good idea. And so let's look at what's the feasibility of this, how much is it going to cost, how can we do this, is it necessary, and so on. So we've tried to change some of that language. We've dropped the notion of preliminary and just made it planning notification. I think it's also important to point out that a lot of what's in this rule remains unchanged. Institutions have long been required to give us planning notification when they wanted to plan for a new program. And that has not changed. And in fact, most institutions are actually pretty good at it. We ran a little study of the numbers, and it's interesting that the average number of days upon receipt of a planning notification to the submit of a proposal is about 133 days. But the range is really interesting because it ranges from, in one instance, a minus 60, where we actually received a planning notification 60 days after we got the proposal, but that was an anomaly, and some are shorter than others. But again, the idea behind the changes in this rule are designed to try to get at those very high dollar items that require a significant commitment of resources, particularly over a fairly lengthy amount of time in establishing a school. So, and you'll see, particularly on page 2 and 3 of the rule itself at the bottom of page 2, where we talk about the notion that an institution may be required to come before the board to talk about what their plans are, to talk about what proposal they have in mind, so that at that point, before the institutions and the coordinating board gets too far along in the process, they have an opportunity to vet their ideas with the board. You have an opportunity to comment on it and add whatever comments you may want to make. And at that point, that doesn't constitute either approval or denial of the program. It would simply be a conversation about what's planned. On page 3, under item 3E, you will also notice that we have confined this kind of notification to those programs that are defined as professional degrees in Texas Education Code 61.306, which includes doctors of medicine, doctor of osteopathy, dental surgery, veterinary medicine, Juris Doctor, and a Bachelor of Laws.
Just to summarize it, it's really we've revised it so it's very straightforward, really. So for those programs that Rex just identified, you have the option to invite them to come and talk to the board. You don't have to, but they're required to do this a year before they actually submit a proposal. We have, after we shared this with institutions, we've had no request to speak at this meeting. This was targeted, actually it's much cleaner, it's what we really intended, so that you could ask those questions and they would be aware of your concerns as well. So it could be a possibility for two-way dialogue in an important kind of way. And at that point, they wouldn't know the cost. We removed cost because you can't really know the total cost. Actually, with what was in there would have suggested it would be beyond these degree programs. That was not really what we intended. So it's very narrow. It's, as Rex said, it's more, in these cases, you're not really typically just approving a degree. There's usually an infrastructure that's much larger that goes around these particular degrees, and it gives you a chance to have that public discussion, if you want it, about those a year ahead of time, before they even submit a proposal, not even, and that would take up to another year to review the actual proposal.
How many comments did we get, and who were they from?
The UT system, UNT,
A&M system.
Texas A&M.
Some private conversations with legislators, they thought we were already doing this. They thought that we were on the cusp of every new planning issue that happened. And when I talked with some staff and some elected officials, and I said, well, actually, no, we find out about many major programs through Google alerts. And Stacy reads about or sees about it on TV or things like that. And the programs are already half built, staff is already hired before they ever come and even give a proposal to us. So I do think that this is more in line of what the legislature thinks we're actually doing, but currently we have not. So any other ways that we can strengthen our position on this, I'm happy to support, but this is a great start. Thank you.
But we got the comments from these institutions, and then you made changes, and,
Yes.
and you're representing to us that once you showed them the changes, everybody was okay with
Well,
it?
we met with the external relations group and shared the changes. We sent out the proposed new rule, and there was time for people to ask to be on our agenda. So I talked with a representative from one system earlier today, because he mentioned the rules, and he said, no, he had no issue with them. But we haven't heard from everyone saying, we have no issue now. Do you have an issue right now? Okay, that's A&M. So we've got two of the big systems that I'm aware of.
Let the record reflect, he sort of.
Surrendered.
I have to say, with the comments that we received, we thought, well, that's not what we really intended at all. So it really helped us clean up the rules to focus on exactly what we want. So the comments were very helpful, I believe, in helping us make the rule targeted and very clear, not anything more than we anticipated, and easy to understand.
Okay, well, I move we approve.
David, I'm sorry, I had one question. David, did you also get a chance to circle back with UNT?
They had a representative at the External Relations Officer briefing. Whether that was transmitted back to others at the campus, I don't know. But we made a point of sending these out to everyone, and I think we would have received some comments. I think this was something that really raised their concerns, and I think they were on top of it. I think we would have heard if there were a continuing concern.
I'm just mentioning that because I did get a call yesterday about just the fact that they had submitted some comments, and it wasn't negative or positive. It was just they were glad that the discussions were being had. So.
Yeah, well, I don't know if they've seen it in that case, but I do know we responded very directly.
Thank you.
There were we could see why they had some concerns, and there were some things we really had not intended. So we did appreciate the responses.
We have a motion?
Second.
We have a second by Fred. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, motion passes. Thank you. Agenda item 5V2 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 5, Subchapter D, Sections 5.71, 5.72, 5.73, 5.76, and 5.78 of the Board Rules concerning the approval and operation of off-campus educational units. Dr. Peebles.
Thank you. These rules are being put forth primarily to try to clarify the distinctions between sites, single institution centers, system centers, mid-Cs, branch campuses, and so on. And it's interesting, we did receive a number of comments, and they're found in your supplemental materials on this particular item. Most of the comments dealt with requirements that have been in place since 2003. We made one substantive change that we didn't actually realize was substantive at the time, and then on reflection realized, no, that is a substantive change, and we have moved it back to the former language that it was in. So we received a lot of comments about that. We also received some comments about the idea of withdrawing approval from a site, and the original language in the rule used the term recognition. And we had changed that to approval, and I will admit that it kind of got past me that recognition and approval are not necessarily the same things, and so we've moved, and we really didn't have any intention of creating something that wasn't there before, so we moved the language back from approval to recognition. That's the one change that you see in this. There were some also questions about the 50-mile radius. A rule, and the 50-mile radius rule, as it is so-called, applies to the development of courses and programs. And so one of the things institutions are required to do whenever they want to offer a new course or a program at a site that is off of their main campus, they must notify all institutions within a 50-mile radius. And if any of those institutions in that 50-mile radius object to those offerings, then they are supposed to try to work it out among themselves, and if they cannot do that, then it comes back to us for adjudication, so to speak. But that actually refers to the programs and the courses that you offer at the site, not the site itself necessarily. And so, and while I think, and we've often talked about this internally in staff, about trying to revisit that whole notion of the 50-mile radius, and I think that's probably a good idea to look at whether that adequately deals with the issue of non-duplication and the issue of the redundancy of programs that may not be necessary. And is it 50 miles, or is it kicked back and forth between 50 miles and a 1-hour drive? 50 miles in West Texas and 50 miles across Dallas or Houston are not really the same things. So, but that's an issue but that's really an issue for the rule that deals with programs and courses.
Yeah, and let me give you a little history, because I think there's going to be a bearing to a topic at the board agenda in terms of approval or disapproval of a off-campus site, is that this issue of approval versus recognition comes from a part where the board approves the name of a center. And the history of this is where we had what, say, for example, is now Texas A&M University. Killeen was originally on the supply-demand pathway as a center, and this was designed so that there wouldn't be confusion. So you couldn't call that Texas A&M University Killeen when that first started. It had to be a center. It had to be clear. And so it's only meant to make sure that there won't be something misleading in terms of the title of an off-campus location, so people think it's independent and suddenly becomes so it really only had to do with that, and the revision goes back to that original language.
You feel that we've answered all the questions from the comments?
Yes.
Move approval.
We have a motion to approve by John. We have a second by Fred. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Thank you. The next agenda item is 5V3, consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 7, Subchapter A, Sections 7.3, 7.4, 7.5, 7.6, 7.7, 7.8, 7.10, 7.11, and 7.14 of Board Rules concerning the oversight of new post-secondary educational institutions. Dr. Peoples.
Thank you. So, as you pointed out earlier, this is actually one of those things that is the culmination of the past year and a half or so in terms of looking at our authority and the way we deal with the so-called Chapter 7 schools, nonprofit particularly, or for-profit institutions and nonprofit institutions that operate in Texas. And this is a 40-page rule, so I will try to hit what I think are the 3 substantive changes in what we've done, and then I'll also then address the comments that we received from it. So I think the most important change that we've made is that this eliminates what was previously known as the provisional certificate of authority. And so certificates of authority revolve around 2 different kinds of institutions in a way, and one of those is an institutional with what we refer to as operational history. So you may have an institution, we currently have one that has applied for a certificate of authority with us, that have long offered certificates in the state of Texas, and if all they offer is certificates, then they're governed by the Texas Workforce Commission. But if they want to offer degrees, then they fall under the jurisdiction of the Higher Education Coordinating Board. And so they have an operational history. They've been in business for a number of years, so they have some operational history in Texas. But still, if they don't have accreditation from a board-recognized accreditor, then the only other alternative they have is to apply for certificate of authority. And then, as David pointed out earlier, at that point, they get 8 years. Their certificate of authority is good for 2 years. They have to come back for a renewal. They can operate under certificate of authority for a total of 8 years. And at the end of that 8-year time period, if they have not received accreditation from one of the state recognized accrediting bodies, then their certificate of authority is revoked. But there are also institutions that want a certificate of authority, and we also are dealing with one of those right now, that do not have an operational history. And so the provisional certificate of authority was originally designated for those institutions. And what we've done is we've collapsed this so that there is one certificate of authority. However, we still treat those with operational history different from those without any operational history, so that there are additional requirements that we can make additional contingencies and demands on them. One would be some kind of a surety bond or a letter of credit, for example, for those institutions that don't have an operational history. Because if they do, then and they've been operating under the Workforce Commission, for example, then they have composite scores for financial aid and that kind of thing. So that's one of the major provisions of this. It also, in a lot of ways, clarifies the expectations for a certificate of authority, in the sense that we've tried to really clarify and lay out in detail what it is that institutions are supposed to provide for us. And again, this puts the coordinating board in the position of being an accrediting body. And so we have always and continue to rely heavily on SACS COC to look at, they're generally recognized as being one of the tougher, if not the toughest, regional accreditors in the United States. And so we have tried to emulate them in terms of requirements and the kind of conditions that we put on institutions. And then another big piece of this is that we've increased our oversight of accrediting bodies themselves. And so, when we reorganized the division last year before last, and set it up in such a way that we had a staff member devoted to Chapter 7 schools, a part of the reason for doing that was to be able to more closely follow the accrediting bodies. And so we now have the ability that when one of these national accrediting bodies comes to Texas to visit an institution for their reaffirmation, then we can, we've built it in that we not only can request, but we can demand that we be allowed to accompany them on the site visit so that we can see firsthand what kind of criteria they're using, how stringent are they, how strict are they. And so another big piece of this is to also clarify our oversight of those accrediting bodies. And frankly, a part of that is to maybe we can get ourselves a little bit ahead of something like what's happened to ACCISC, and we can see this coming maybe before anybody else does, and put institutions in a better position and put us in a much better position to deal with it. And then last but not least, it also, to some extent, increases our oversight over the institutions themselves in the sense of clarifying the kinds of information we want to see from them, the frequency at which we want to see it. Before, we had to rely pretty heavily on their annual reporting, and it really, in certificates of authority, they're every 2 years. We would get to take an in-depth look at them when they came up with a renewal. We've built in language that allows us to take a more in-depth look at any time in those 2 years that something comes up that shows cause for that, and that may be a decline in their financial composite score. It may be a series of complaints from students. It may be the information that we receive from accrediting bodies that shows that they're under heavy scrutiny from them as well. We did receive some comments. The comments, a lot of them revolved around the notion of what are called AOS degrees, Associate of Occupational Studies degrees. We have grandfathered in 2 institutions. So we've changed the rules to reflect 2 instead of 3. For a long time there were 3, and that one no longer offers the AOS degree, so we've changed the language from 3 to 2. But we did receive a series of questions about how this would affect the 2 current institutions, particularly one of them that operates with an AOS degree. And essentially, it doesn't change their operation at all. So they're still grandfathered in, and until such time as they quit offering these degrees, then no one else in Texas will be allowed to do it. And an AOS degree is essentially a 60 to a 72-hour degree that is comprised solely of career and technical education courses. So we received, in all of those comments, no changes. We don't feel like any changes are required for that. And then we did ask, and we also got some questions about accreditation removal and what happens when the Department of Education withdraws approval of an accrediting body, as may very well happen with ACCISC in the very near future. And so what we've done is you'll see that and this is reflected, we didn't want to reprint the full 40 pages of rules, so we reflected those in your supplemental materials on pages 4 and 5. And what we've done is we've added provisions in there that would allow us to extend to institutions, in effect, accreditation equal to or as much as the feds do, but maybe later. And one of the things that DOE has struggled with is what happens to students when that accreditation is pulled. So if you take away the accreditation from one of these bodies or take away their recognition, then what happens to those students on the day after that recognition has gone away? And they no longer are eligible for financial aid and so on. And what DOE, I think, is going to ask for is an 18-month time period. And what that does is that allows institutions that are affected by the removal to then either seek accreditation with someone else or to seek a certificate of authority, or some institutions have indicated they will probably do both. And at the same time to try to cover themselves, I assume. But, you know, we have a number of institutions under ACSIC operating in Texas, and, you know, 25 to 30 of those 40 or so institutions that are left are actually viable institutions that have good composite scores. They've long been in good standing with their accrediting body, but their accrediting body is not in good standing, so that may be an issue in and of itself. But otherwise, they seem to be good actors in this. And so we want to try to protect the students in this as much as we can and give students the opportunity to either move out to someone else or at least cover the institution while they take care of the business they need to do to become accredited either with us or with someone else.
Feel you've answered all their questions.
Yes.
Okay. Any discussion, question? We have a motion from John Steen, a second from Arcelia. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Agenda item 5V4 is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to proposed amendments to Chapter 1, Subchapter B, Sections 2121 through 2130, Chart 1 and Chart 2 of Board Rules concerning the determination of resident status. Kathy Cordova, Assistant General Counsel, will present this item. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, board members. Good afternoon. The purpose of the revisions to these residency rules was in large part to make them more understandable. We had a number of questions from admissions counselors throughout the state on the rules, and we thought that revising them would make them clearer for both those admissions counselors and students. So the staff accomplished this by removing outdated language, restructuring rule provisions, and adding some clarifying language. The major change we made was staff had a new interpretation of Texas Education Code 54.056B, dealing with the when an institution classifies a student as a resident, non-resident, and they should have been classified as a resident. If you'll permit me, I'll read the provision. Regardless of the reason for the error, if an institution of higher education erroneously classifies a person as a non-resident of this state, the institution shall charge in the resident tuition to the person beginning with the academic term in which the institution discovers the error. The institution immediately shall refund to the person the amount of tuition the person paid in excess of resident tuition. Current rule and the past interpretation had been that if an institution, based on missing information or information that was incorrect, they received from the student, then the institution absolved all responsibility for refunding the excess tuition charged to the student. Closer review of the statute, we believe that the legislature, in inserting the phrase regardless of the reason for the error, requires the institutions to refund the tuition, excess tuition, in every instance in which the student was classified as a non-resident and should have been classified as a resident. We received comment from one stakeholder who was concerned about the liability for the institution to have to refund this excess tuition. However, the staff believes that it is clear that the legislature intended for the institution to be responsible for refunding the excess tuition. We also received other very helpful comments from other stakeholders to help us further clarify the rules, and staff has incorporated those changes as necessary. I'll take any questions if you have any.
Does this impact, we had the lawsuit regarding veterans and which veteran is a resident, which veteran just moved here to get the free college tuition. Does that impact that and declaring who's really a resident and who's not?
If a person should have been classified as a resident and is erroneously classified as a non-resident, yes, it would impact.
So the whole code change is really about erroneously saying the student wasn't a resident.
Correct. In current rule, we had a definition of erroneously classifies a person as a non-resident, and staff is proposing to repeal that definition.
You feel strongly that you've answered all the questions you had a lot of comments.
I do. Most of the comments were just to further clarify the rule, to make it more understandable. The major comment that came in was regarding this new interpretation of the statute.
Move approval.
We have a motion for approval. We have a second from Fred. Any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Agenda item 5W is consideration of adopting the staff recommendation to the committee relating to providing funds for the Innovative Academies, the next generation of early college high schools, an initiative of the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, Texas Education Agency, and the Texas Workforce Commission. Dr. Peebles.
Oh, thank you. Yes, we're seeking approval to transfer $1 million of Perkins Reserve Funds to TEA, who will be the principal agent in this initiative to create more early college high schools with a CTE focus. You may recall that a couple of years ago, the coordinating board led an effort in this regard, and this would greatly expand the idea, and there's actually would be $7.2 million involved in a total effort, and we would contribute $1 million toward it.
Any questions?
So moved.
David?
How much do we have in the reserve fund now?
$1 million.
So we're committing all the reserve fund?
Yes. Reserve is somewhat of a misnomer in this regard. It's money that comes out of leadership, and it's really sort of a federal requirement that it be placed in reserve to keep it because it's discretionary funds.
Discretionaries are better.
It's, not reserved discretionary.
Yeah, I'm having a hard time understanding that. Maybe you could elaborate more. Would we want to recreate a reserve fund in the future? I mean, I know why we have reserves in other organizations for rainy days. Is this the rainy day?
Well, no, that's really why reserve is not the proper term.
Okay.
It's money that we're supposed to spend at our discretion, and we're spending it on something the governor very much wants to do.
Okay. Do we know where the other $6.2 million comes from?
It's going to come from TEA and the Texas Workforce Commission.
Yes.
So they're putting in more than $1 million?
The Texas Workforce Commission is putting in the bulk of the money.
Okay. And TEA is the right place to house this, to take the lead?
These are early college high schools.
They're high schools?
Yes.
So, I mean, are these going to be, these 18 proposals, is that going to be a competitive bidding process, or how are they going to be designated?
Yes, it will be a competitive bidding process, and the coordinating board staff in some way will be involved in the review of those applications.
We will? Okay.
Yes, sir.
And also, TEA is the best location because of the Perkins funds as well, because Perkins funds originally come to them and they designate some to us. So from a technical standpoint, it's helpful for them to be managed through that agency.
This is actually a very similar project to the creation of the 4 early college high schools that we did several years ago through the same tri-agency cooperative effort. And
These do focus on the areas that the governor's office has designated as primary industry clusters, which is a little different from before. There was more discretion.
Right.
And there's some encouragement for universities to be involved this time, which we did not have any involved previously. So there's small differences, but important ones.
Other questions? We have a motion. Yes. And do I have a second from Fred? All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Agenda item 6 is adjournment. Do I have a motion? Have a motion? A second? All in favor, say aye. Thank you.
Commissioner, on that,